Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you are not trudging across the battlefields of Napoleon or gasping for air in an iron lung. No, your fate is far less dignified and considerably more unhygienic. You are a medieval barber-surgeon, which is to say, you spend your days alternately trimming beards, lancing boils, and sawing off limbs, often without bothering to rinse the basin in between. Before we sharpen the razor and prepare the bowl, do me one small favour. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. I've linked my favourite pair in the description. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. Your story begins in a shop that smells of soap, sweat, and something far less sanitary. You are young, barely more than a boy, though in the medieval world that counts as grown enough to work until your back breaks. The sign above the door bears the striped pole that marks out your master's trade, though its symbolism is less romantic than future centuries will pretend. The red and white are not decorative flourishes, but reminders of blood and bandages, the two constants of this profession. Hair and gore, veins and whiskers, lather and pus. They all swirl together in the same basin here. You step over the threshold on your first day with more eagerness than sense, clutching the small bundle of clothes your family could spare, unaware of how much heavier your hands will feel once the years pile onto them. The shop itself is cramped and badly lit, though you will come to know every creak of its boards. On one side stand the chairs, wooden and cracked, with leather seats rubbed smooth by the nervous shifting of countless customers. On the other is the table of tools, razors, scissors, knives, bowls, and an iron used for cauterizing, all of them jumbled together, as if no one could quite decide which belonged to grooming and which belonged to surgery. In truth, no one can. To one man, that blade trims a beard. To another, it slices open an abscess. There is no real difference beyond how hard you press. Behind the counter hang jars filled with cloudy liquid, within which float leeches as sluggish as overfed worms. The creatures pulse faintly, half dead in their glass prisons, yet they will be placed on human flesh soon enough to earn their keep. You sweep your eyes over all of this with a mixture of awe and dread. These are the instruments of a calling that is at once ordinary and grotesque, a trade tolerated rather than respected. Your master notices your hesitation and gives a grunt that could mean welcome or warning. He is a man of indeterminate age, though the grey streaks in his beard and the webbing of scars across his hands suggest he has lived through more blood than anyone should. His tunic is spotted with stains so deeply set they will never come out. He has the posture of someone who knows his work will never earn him glory, but who also knows it will never lack for customers. He gestures toward a broom without ceremony, and that is how you begin your career. Not with a lesson in anatomy, but with the task of sweeping up curls of hair mixed with the crumbs of yesterday's bread, the ashes of the fire, and flecks of something you strongly suspect is dried blood. You sweep anyway. Apprentices do not complain. The first hours of that first day pass in a blur of errands. You fetch water from the well until your arms ache, carrying bucket after bucket to fill the basins. You sharpen razors on the whetstone, terrified of letting one slip and cut your fingers, not because of the pain, but because you know you will be forced to keep working regardless. You fold cloths that are more whole than fabric and wring them out after a half-hearted washing. Everything you do feels clumsy and inadequate, but your master says little, only watching with eyes that seem to weigh you like a side of meat. The silence is heavy. You had expected talk of learning a noble craft. Instead, you discover that most of the job is menial labour punctuated by the occasional scream. It is only after midday that you witness the full strangeness of the profession. A man enters, unshaven and smelling of sour ale, slapping a coin onto the counter and demanding a shave. Your master obliges, lathering his face with a briskness that suggests this is the least offensive task of the day. You stand close, trying to memorize the motion of hand and blade. The rhythm seems almost soothing, the scrape of steel against stubble sounding like the rustle of cloth. Yet before the razor has even finished its work on the jawline, another customer limps through the door. This one clutches his arm, where a boil the size of a pigeon's egg has swollen and burst, leaking a foul mixture of pus and blood. He is pale, sweating, and in visible agony. There is only one chair, and so he waits while the first man has his beard neatly shaped. You do not understand at first. Surely the sick man should take precedence. Surely the man with the gaping wound deserves attention more urgently than the one who wants his cheeks smooth for the tavern. But that is the lesson you're learning, and quickly. Barbering and surgery are not separate spheres, nor are they ranked by importance. They are simply tasks in a list, to be performed in whatever order the customers happen to arrive. The man who wants to look respectable for market day will not wait for the man who is dying of infection, and your master will not ask him to. Commerce rules the shop more firmly than compassion. You feel a small knot form in your stomach as you watch. The shave ends, the first customer departs, and then without a word, the same chair receives the man with the wound. Your master does not clean it, nor change the cloth beneath. The same basin that caught to stubble now waits for pus and blood. He takes a knife from the table, wipes it once against his apron, an apron already crusted with stains, and begins to work at the swollen flesh. The sound is wet, tearing, almost like stepping on rotten fruit. The man howls, his fists pounding the arms of the chair, his legs kicking against the floorboards. You stand frozen, the broom still clutched in your hand, while the smell of rot fills your nose so thickly you feel you might gag. Yet your master works as calmly as if he were still trimming a beard. This is the normal order of things, and you're expected to learn it. When the boil has been lanced and a foul stream of fluid has spattered into the basin, your master presses a rag into the wound and ties it off with a strip of cloth. He takes no note of the man's tears or his curses. Payment is demanded and reluctantly given. The man staggers out, leaving behind a smear of fluid on the seat that you will later be ordered to wipe up. The chair sits empty, only briefly, before another client enters, asking for his head to be bled to cure a headache. There is no pause, no cleaning, no ritual separation between one life and another. It is all the same: hair, blood, pus, spit. You realise with a chill that you have entered a world where human suffering is routine, shaved down to the same level as trimming sideburns. For the remainder of the day, you fetch, carry, and watch. You watch a tooth yanked from a mouth with nothing but a grunt for warning. You watch a soldier have his scalp stitched after a tavern brawl, the needle passing through flesh as easily as through cloth. You watch a beggar faint during bloodletting and get dragged into the street so as not to alarm the paying customers. Each sight is worse than the last, and yet each is treated with the same weary indifference by your master. You begin to feel a strange dislocation, as if the world outside the shop is one place and this room another, governed by its own darker rules. The ordinary street with its markets and church bells still exists, but you now live on the other side of the threshold, where men come in cheerful and walk out bleeding, and no one remarks on the difference. By evening your arms ache and your head feels thick with the smell of iron and lye. You sit on a stool near the door, trying not to think about what you have seen, but the images repeat themselves each time you close your eyes. You picture the lancing of that boil, the gush of pus, the scream of the man as his body betrayed him in public. You picture the easy calm of your master as he shaved, cut, stitched, and bled as though each act were equal. You know, deep down, that you will never be able to walk past a barber's pole again without smelling blood. Just as you are beginning to hope the day is ending, your master turns to you. In his hand is a razor, its edge gleaming faintly in the guttering lamplight. He says nothing, only holds it out. The broom slides from your hand without your willing it, and you feel the handle of the blade press cold against your palm. Your fingers close around it instinctively, though your skin prickles as though you've seized a snake. Your master gestures toward the whetstone, expecting you to put edge to steel, to prove you are not merely a boy, but an apprentice worthy of the chair. Your hands tremble, your stomach tightens, and in that moment you understand fully that this is the first step into a life from which there will be no return. The days that follow prove that apprenticeship is less a formal education and more a slow drowning. At first you still sweep and fetch, but now you also stand closer to the chair, observing. You study the way your master lathers a man's face, the way he tilts the chin to catch the light. You watch him nick an ear and ignore the curse that follows, moving on as if a drop of blood were no more troublesome than spilled soap. He hands you smaller tasks, brushing hair from shoulders, trimming away the uneven edges left from a rushed cut. Soon enough, you are trusted with the razor itself. The first time you draw it down the jaw of a trembling customer, your heart pounds so hard you fear the man can hear it through his skin. But the stubble falls neatly, and though your hand shakes, the blade does not bite too deep. The customer leaves with both ears still attached, which your master declares an acceptable success. From there, your duties multiply. You become barber as much as errand boy, and in this shop, barbering is never free from blood. You cut hair, sweep clippings into piles, and notice how they mingle with the droplets from the bowl of a recently bled patient. The smell of iron is constant, masked only briefly by the lather of soap before it too grows tainted with sweat and pus. Hair and gore are not two separate categories anymore, but different textures of the same refuse. You begin to recognize them by sight. Black curls tangled with brown clots, blonde strands stuck to the rim of the bleeding basin. Soon it no longer shocks you. Instead, you sweep them up together, a single mess as though this were the natural state of things. Clients come in at all hours and they bring with them not just their bodies but their voices. They chatter as if nothing around them is grotesque. One man recounts the price of wool, while another is stitched through the scalp. A farmer jokes about the mayor's gout while your master applies a leech to a merchant's neck. Politics is discussed in the same breath as plague rumours, as if neither is weightier than the other. You stand with the basin in your hands, catching a stream of blood that dribbles into its copper belly, and listen to two men argue whether the king's taxes will rise again. Their words flow as steadily as the vein, and just as indifferently. To them, bloodletting is simply an errand, as ordinary as shoeing a horse. The leeches in their jars become a constant presence. At first, you cannot help but stare at them. Dark, writhing things that squirm against the glass, their bodies pulsing with an alien hunger. You imagine what it must feel like to have one clinging to your own skin, its mouth boring in, its body swelling with your blood. Soon enough, you see it firsthand. A merchant sits in the chair, complaining of fevers, and your master plucks a leech from its jar, as casually as one might select a carrot from a basket. The thing writhes in his fingers, alive and desperate, until it is pressed against the man's neck. It latches on, the skin dimpling, the creature stretching as it drinks. The man winces, but says nothing more. You hold the jar and wait, stomach queasy, until the leech grows fat and glossy, then peel it off and return it to the cloudy water. No one pays you extra for handling them. It is simply part of the work. You find yourself growing used to the peculiar rhythm of the shop. Shaving comes in the morning, when men wish to look presentable for the day. Bleeding tends to fill the afternoons, when the heat and stale air make people complain of heaviness in the head or stomach. Boils and sores arrive at all hours, stubborn and recurring, as though the city itself were constantly birthing new wounds to send your way. The chatter of clients provides a steady background, though it no longer distracts you. At times you forget they are speaking at all. So focused are you on the basin you carry, the towel you press, the drip you watch. Your ears grow deaf to complaints, while your eyes learn to see only what must be cut, drained, or scraped away. In the evenings, after the last client leaves, you help your master clean the tools. Not properly. Proper cleaning is for fantasies of another century, but enough to scrape off the clotted remains of the day. Razors are wiped against rags already stiff with dried stains. Scissors are dipped in water that has grown cloudy with soap and blood, then dried on your apron. The bowls are rinsed in the bucket, and you watch as the water turns red, then pink, then clear enough to pass for clean. By the time you finish, night has fallen, and the shop smells faintly of lye and iron. You fall asleep in the back room on a pallet stuffed with straw, your dreams filled with the scrape of blades and the drone of gossiping clients. Weeks become months, and you grow steadier with the razor. You no longer tremble as much, though the thought of cutting too deep lingers always in your mind. Your master begins to trust you with entire shaves, standing back with arms crossed as you lather, scrape, and wipe. Customers are wary at first, but when they realise your cuts are no worse than his, they allow it. You feel a certain pride when a man emerges smooth-faced and nods in approval. Yet that pride is always tempered by what follows, because as soon as the chair is vacated by one man, it is filled by another, clutching his arm, his neck, or his belly, waiting to be bled or drained. The razor is rinsed once, then turned from beard to vein. You learn to make the transition without thought, without even pausing to consider that this same edge that caressed a jaw now opens an artery. It is all one continuous motion. Some days you almost convince yourself this trade is respectable. Men do need haircuts after all, and bleeding is prescribed by every learned authority as the cure for nearly everything. But the illusion crumbles each time you see the aftermath. A man leaving pale and unsteady, clutching his bandage, or a child brought in to be bled for fever and carried out limp in his mother's arms. No one blames you or your master for the deaths. People say it was the will of God, or the illness itself, or simply bad luck. You nod along, but deep inside you suspect that your hands are not entirely innocent. Still, the work continues. The shop must open the next day, and men must have their beards trimmed, their veins opened, their humours balanced. It is on one such day, after weeks of haircuts and bleedings blurring together, that you learn the most important truth of the trade. You are shaving a customer, an older man with sagging skin and a long, sharp nose. He complains of his wife, of his joints, of the price of barley, and you nod in practiced agreement while sliding the razor down his cheek. Your hand is steady, but the skin shifts unexpectedly beneath the blade, and you feel the sudden give of flesh parting. A thin red line opens on his neck. The man gasps, then curses, pressing a hand to the wound. It is shallow, more embarrassing than dangerous, but for a heartbeat you freeze in horror. Your master, however, does not move. He does not scold or comfort, only watches with weary indifference. The customer ties a cloth around his neck, grumbling, and pays his coin regardless. You clean the blade, your fingers slick with soap and sweat, heart still hammering. Later, while putting the razor away, you slip and the edge bites into your own thumb. The cut is sharp and bright, blood welling instantly. You hiss, instinctively pressing the wound, but no one notices. Your master does not look up, and the next client is already lowering himself into the chair. You wrap a rag around your hand and keep working. The realization sinks in slowly. It does not matter if you bleed. No one cares. The shop will go on. Your master begins to test you with tasks beyond hair and blood. He starts with small things like holding a patient's head steady or pinning down an arm that flails during a bleed. Then he places a cloth in your hands, and tells you to mop the sweat from a man's face while he drives a needle through the scalp. It is hardly more skilled than wiping tables, but it plants you firmly within the procedures themselves. The first time you feel someone's breath hot on your hand while they groan through clenched teeth, you realise that proximity is its own form of responsibility. You're no longer just an errand boy circling the edges of horror. You're part of it now, bound to its rhythm. Not long after, the teeth arrive, or rather, they are revealed to you as part of your duty. Until then, you had thought of barbers as concerned with hair, perhaps with veins, but never with mouths. You learn otherwise when a man stumbles in from the tavern, jaws swollen, eyes glazed with pain and drink. He sits heavily in the chair, slurs that his tooth is cursed by the devil, and offers coin for its removal. Your master takes a pair of iron forceps from the table, a crude, heavy thing, with jaws like the beak of some ill-tempered bird, and gestures for you to hold the man's head. You place your hands against his skull, feeling the sweat and the tremor beneath, while your master jams the iron deep into the man's mouth. The scream is immediate, raw, so loud you flinch, but you're told to hold tighter. The jaw jerks, the man thrashes, but your grip is firm. With a final wrench, the tooth comes free, snapping from the root with a sound like breaking twigs. Blood fills the man's mouth, spilling over his lips, staining your sleeve. He gurgles, spits, and staggers out, clutching the tooth as proof the devil has been vanquished. Your master nods once in satisfaction, then turns to you. Next time, he says, you'll do it. There is no ceremony, no instruction beyond that. Just inevitability. The next time is not long in coming. Word spreads quickly through taverns that the barber-surgeon is pulling teeth for less than the cost of a physician's consultation, and suddenly men are lining up with jaws swollen and blackened by rot. They smell of ale and sweat, their breath sour with infection. They curse and laugh and argue even as they wait their turn, treating their agony as another diversion in an evening of drinking. You begin to see that the pain itself is part of the performance. The man who screams loudest wins a moment's admiration. The one who grits his teeth earns a muttered respect, and the one who faints is laughed at for days afterward. You stand among them, razor and cloth in hand, realizing that to them you're not a healer but a necessary tormentor. When your turn comes, the tools feel far too large for your hands. The forceps are heavy, the iron cold, and the man in the chair is already squirming before you touch him. He reeks of beer, his eyes unfocused, but he opens his mouth wide enough to reveal the culprit. A molar, black with decay, its surface cracked like old timber. You hesitate, hovering at the edge of his lips, until your master coughs pointedly behind you. So you push the metal inside, awkwardly angling for the root. The man lets out a muffled howl and jerks away, nearly knocking you backwards, but you clamp tighter, pressing your weight into the chair as your master instructed. The tooth resists, as though determined to stay lodged forever, and your arms begin to ache. Then suddenly it gives, sliding loose with a grisly pop. You stumble back triumphant, only for the man to spit a great gob of blood into your face. There is no applause, no thanks, only his drunken laughter as he lurches from the chair, tooth in hand, leaving you wiping your eyes with a rag. You taste copper on your lips, and you realise this is the true apprenticeship. Not sweeping, not sharpening, but enduring humiliation as well as horror. To succeed here is not to heal, but to withstand. You say nothing because saying nothing is the first law of the shop. The work will not pause to ask whether you're ready, and the men will not temper their pain to spare your nerves. You will either learn to keep your grip steady under the spray of blood and spit, or you will be cast out. The teeth continue. Some come out whole, others shatter, leaving fragments buried in the gum. Those are worse, requiring scraping and digging while the man thrashes and roars. You grow accustomed to the sound of enamel snapping and the sight of roots dangling like worms. After a while, you no longer wince at the taste of blood. that drips from your hands onto your lips. You even begin to predict which men will faint, which will rage, and which will try to mask their fear with jokes. It is all one long tavern brawl disguised as medicine, and you are its unwilling participant. Boils, too, become part of your routine. They arrive in all shapes and sizes, some tight and furious, glowing red against pale flesh, others bloated and soft, trembling at the touch. You lance them with knives not much sharper than kitchen tools, pressing until the pus bursts forth in a stream that spatters your apron. The smell is rank, clinging to your nostrils long after the wound is dressed. Patients groan, sigh with relief, or sometimes collapse entirely, but always they pay. It is cheaper than a physician, and the people of your city know the arithmetic of survival too well to argue with results. You are not expected to cure, only to release the foulness and send them limping home with a cloth tied over the wound. It is strange how quickly your senses adjust. At first, the sight of a boil splitting open makes you gag, the pus gleaming in the lamplight like rancid cream. But after a dozen, then 100, you find yourself studying them with detachment, noting the variety, judging which will burst easily and which will resist. You begin to think of them as puzzles to be solved rather than sufferings to be eased. When the crowd of men jeers at a patient's scream, you no longer flinch. You even begin to smile faintly, not in cruelty, but in recognition of how completely this work has altered you. What once repulsed now feels ordinary, almost dull. All the while, the customers talk. They speak of the price of fish, of rumours of plague returning, of wars being fought in distant fields. Their words mingle with the crack of teeth, the hiss of boiling water, the wet pop of boils bursting. You realise that for them, this shop is not a chamber of horrors, but a place like any other. Another stop between tavern and market. They will remember the conversation far longer than the face of the boy who wrenched their molar free. You are a hand, a blade, a necessary evil, nothing more, and so your training continues. Day by day, you learn to handle the forceps with more certainty, to brace your knee against a thrashing patient's chest, to press the cloth tighter when the blood flows too freely. You learn that a man will pay even while cursing you, that he will spit on you one moment and shake your hand the next, if the pain recedes. You learn that victory in this trade is not measured in gratitude, but in the fact that the next man still sits in the chair, coin in hand, willing to undergo the same. At last, one evening, you find yourself facing a particularly stubborn case, a thick-jawed farmer whose molar juts sideways in his gum. The tavern crowd has followed him, eager for spectacle. They lean against the walls, mugs in hand, ready to mock or cheer. Your master gestures toward the chair, and you step forward, heart pounding but hands steady. You set the forceps against the tooth, press and twist. The man bellows, his spit flying, his legs kicking. The room fills with laughter, jeers, encouragement. You wrench again, harder this time, and feel the root tear free. The tooth comes out whole, long and ragged, and you hold it up for proof before the man can doubt you. He answers not with thanks, but with a choking laugh as he spits a great mouthful of blood straight into your face. The crowd howls with glee. You wipe your eyes, blinking through the sting, and realise this is the closest thing you will ever receive to applause. Your master does not remark on your baptism of spit and gore. He simply sends you back to sweeping. By the time you've cleared the clippings, drained the basin, and wiped down the chair, another man has arrived with a boil behind his ear. Life in the shop allows no pause, no recognition, no applause. But beyond the routine of razors and basins, a different kind of initiation waits for you. One that takes place not in the shop, but in the narrow chambers of the guild hall. You had heard whispers of the guild long before you entered its doors. Men in the tavern mutter about fees, about rivalries about the eternal squabble between physicians and barber-surgeons. The physicians claim the dignity of learning, the authority of universities and Latin texts, while barber-surgeons claim the authority of hands hardened by practice and basins filled with blood. Neither has much respect for the other, though each depends on the other's existence to measure his own worth. What you soon discover, however, is that the guild exists less to defend your livelihood than to entangle it. Its rules are endless, its fines frequent, its officers as preoccupied with petty turf as a pair of drunks brawling in the street. Your first meeting takes place in a hall that smells of damp parchment and sour ale. The benches are filled with men who look remarkably like your master, bearded, scarred, stained by their work. Some still carry the scent of their shops with them, the faint musk of soap mixing with iron and pus. At the front, beneath a fading crest of scissors and bowl, sit the wardens, older men with more paunch than muscle, their robes trimmed to remind everyone that they are more important than the rest. They call the meeting to order not with solemnity, but with grumbling, as though each word costs them effort. You sit on a bench near your master trying to follow, but it quickly becomes clear that the matter at hand is not healing, nor learning, nor the improvement of your trade. It is whether one man's apprentice trimmed a beard in a parish that by rights belonged to another. The argument stretches for an hour. Men shout, pound their fists, call witnesses. Someone produces a statement signed by two customers claiming they saw a razor drawn across a chin on the wrong street corner. The accused denies it, swearing on saints and scripture. The wardens deliberate as though the fate of kingdoms hangs in the balance, only to conclude that a fine must be paid to preserve the dignity of the guild. The sum is more than the man's apprentice will earn in a season, but the wardens do not care. They move on briskly to the next case, a barber accused of pulling a tooth too close to the university, thus offending the physicians who claim dentistry as their own sacred art. The punishment is again a fine. You begin to realise that the guild hall is less a sanctuary than a market stall, and the commodity for sale is permission to keep breathing. As the weeks pass, you find yourself dragged to more of these meetings. Your master insists you attend, claiming it is part of your education. You sit through hours of quarrels about who may shave whose clients, whether a surgeon may stitch a wound without paying dues to the physicians, whether the price of a basin of bloodletting should rise in one parish but not another. Rarely, if ever, does anyone speak of the people who sit in the chairs, who scream through tooth extractions or faint during bleeding. They are ghosts in these halls, invoked only when useful as evidence against another man. Patients exist here, not as human beings but as currency, tokens used to argue over who holds the right to cut, lance, and drain them. The rivalry with physicians is the sharpest thorn. Licensed doctors sneer at barber-surgeons, dismissing them as butchers with razors, unfit for serious medicine. They write Latin treatises, quote Galen and Hippocrates, and assure their wealthy patrons that true healing belongs to the learned. Yet when their prescriptions of herbs and prayers fail, who do they call upon to do the cutting and the cauterizing? Men like your master, and now men like you. The physicians resent this dependence, and so they lobby the guild to restrict what procedures barber-surgeons may perform. One week you hear heated debate about whether you may stitch wounds above the neck. Another week, whether drawing blood from the arm requires a physician's approval. At times it seems the guild exists solely to remind you that whatever skill you gain in practice, your hands are never fully your own. You begin to see how power works in this world. Patients may scream in your chair, bleed into your basin, or collapse under your hands, but none of that matters as much as whether the guild stamps approval on your actions. To lance a boil is acceptable one street over, punishable the next. To pull a tooth is permissible on one day of the week, forbidden on another if the physicians are restless. It is not life or death that governs your work, but lines on a map drawn by men in robes who have not held a razor in decades, and every breach, no matter how trivial, results in coin flowing from your pocket into theirs. The indifference to suffering becomes clearer each time you attend. You remember a case brought forward of a barber who bled a young boy feverish with plague. The child died within the hour, yet the guild did not question the wisdom of the procedure, nor the grief of the parents. They asked only whether the barber had performed it within his licensed parish. He had not, and so he was fined. The boy's death warranted no remark. The boundary crossed was the true crime. You sat on the bench, chilled by the realization that if you had been the one holding the basin, the verdict would have been no different. Lives are expendable, but territories are sacred. Your master mutters darkly during these meetings, but even he pays the fines without resistance. To defy the guild outright would be to invite ruin. Without its sanction, you cannot work, and without work, you cannot eat. So he grumbles, curses the wardens under his breath, and presses coins into their hands anyway. You begin to understand why his shoulders sag, and his eyes hold that weary glaze. He has long ago accepted that the guild is less about medicine than about maintenance. Maintenance of hierarchy, of coin flow, of the illusion that barber-surgeons are organised rather than scavenging for scraps beneath physicians. In time, you too become entangled. It happens on a day much like any other. A man staggers into the shop, pale and sweating, clutching his belly. His wound is foul, the flesh blackened at the edges, the smell enough to churn your stomach. You help your master drain the abscess, pressing cloth to the spurting pus, fighting back your gag. The man moans, begs for water, and you slip a cup to his lips. He will live for now, though you know the rot may yet claim him. As you're cleaning the basin, another customer comes in, asking only for a trim before meeting a prospective employer. Your master waves him to the chair, still sticky with blood, and hands you the scissors. It feels almost comical to shift from draining death to shaping hair, but you obey. The cut is quick, the man pleased, and you think nothing more of it. That evening, however, a summons arrives. You are called before the wardens, accused of trimming hair in a parish not your own. The complaint comes from another barber who claims the customer was his by right, his livelihood stolen by your scissors. You explain, haltingly, desperately, that you had just finished treating a man close to death, that there was no time to consider boundaries, that you were only following orders. The wardens listen with blank faces. When you finish, they declare the matter settled. You are fined. The sum is more than you have earned in weeks, and it stings worse than any cut. You leave the guild hall that night with the realization pressing heavy on your chest. A man's life carries no weight here, but a misplaced haircut does. The wound you drained earlier, the hours you spent soaked in pus and blood, they count for nothing. What matters is that you crossed an invisible line, that you trimmed the wrong head in the wrong place. You pay the coin, you bow your head, and you walk out into the night. Behind you, the wardens move on to the next case, their voices already droning, indifferent to the fact that you have begun to understand just how little your craft means, beyond the sound of clinking money. The fine gnaws at you for days, but your master shrugs it off with the weariness of one long accustomed to such indignities. The guild takes, he mutters, and we bleed the people. That is the order of things. His words prove truer than you expect, for not long after, he entrusts you with your first true basin of your own. Not the shallow bowls you've carried to catch shavings, or the cracked cups that once caught the dribble of a tooth socket, but a proper bleeding basin, wide polished, its rim notched to fit snug against an arm or neck. The shape is designed for efficiency, though it looks more like something meant for a butcher's block than a healer's table. It is placed in your hands as if it were an honour, and for a fleeting moment, you almost believe it is. Bloodletting is no haphazard act. It is not the reckless gouging of boils or the crude wrenching of teeth. It carries a ritual weight that feels almost sacred, though its altar is nothing more than the barber's chair, and its liturgy nothing more than screams and groans. You learn to prepare carefully. The patient is seated, the cloth arranged, the basin poised beneath. You choose the vein with deliberate care, the median cubital at the elbow for fevers, the cephalic near the wrist for headaches, the saphenous at the ankle for ailments of the lower body. There are charts, crude drawings inked by men who claim to know which vein corresponds to which imbalance of humours. You cannot read them well, but your master points with his thick finger, reciting the associations like verses of scripture. Yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, blood. The four elements swirling unseen beneath the skin, waiting for your hand to bring them back into balance. The incision is its own small ceremony. You steady the arm, pull the skin taut, and draw the razor across in one swift motion. The cut must be clean, deep enough to open the vein, but not so deep as to sever it. Too shallow, and nothing flows. Too deep, and everything does. The first sight of that stream is mesmerizing. It wells up dark and glistening, then arcs downward in a steady ribbon, splashing against the basin's curve, with a sound more delicate than you expected, almost like rain dripping from a roof. You are told to watch closely, to time the flow. Too little blood, and the humours remain unbalanced. Too much, and the patient grows pale, faint, or worse. Your master teaches you to gauge by colour. Bright red is healthy, dark and sluggish is foul. You are to let the bad blood escape until the flow brightens, until you're satisfied that the sickness has been drawn out. The patient sways, mutters, sometimes vomits, but you press on until the basin holds what you believe to be enough of his life. There is a strange pride in the act. Unlike pulling teeth or lancing boils, bloodletting carries with it a sense of official purpose. Learned physicians themselves prescribe it, even if they will not deign to perform it. Charts hang in their chambers, declaring when and how often one ought to be bled. Patients believe in it fervently, arriving not only when ill, but also when the season changes, as though the body requires cleansing just as a house does. You watch as they line up outside the shop during spring and autumn, waiting their turn as patiently as parishioners waiting for confession. The street hums with quiet resignation, the clink of coins, the murmurs of neighbours. Men joke about how much blood they will lose. Women whisper about the health of their children, and all step forward willingly, as if submitting to an unpleasant but necessary chore. You feel a flicker of dignity when you lift your basin, as though for once your trade is not merely tolerated but sought after. It is a dignity that does not last long, for the more you perform the ritual, the more you see that it is less holy than habitual. Men come not because it cures, but because it is what has always been done. They sit, they bleed, they stagger home pale and trembling, then return weeks later to repeat the cycle. Some swear it helps, others collapse into fever again, almost immediately. It makes no difference to the shop. Your task is not to heal, but to perform, to maintain the rhythm of cutting and draining. You hold the basin, you watch the flow, you bind the wound, and you send them back into the street. Their fate is no more your concern than the sweepings of hair at your feet. Still, the spectacle fascinates you. The smell of iron, sharp and metallic, becomes a constant perfume. The basin warms quickly in your hands, steam rising faintly from its surface. You grow skilled at flicking away the thin skin of clot that forms along the edge, skilled at folding and binding the bandages, so that the patient does not leak too much on the walk home. You learn to keep your expression calm, even when the patient's lips turn blue or his eyes roll back. A little fainting is normal, your master reminds you. It means the sickness is leaving. And so you learn to nod reassuringly as men slump sideways in the chair, even as you silently wonder whether they will wake again. The shop becomes busier with each passing season. Word spreads quickly when the barber is skilled with the vein, and you find yourself standing with basin ready from dawn until dusk. The line stretches out the door, winding through the muddy street. Farmers, merchants, housewives, even children, all come to you to be drained. Some cross themselves before you cut, muttering prayers that mix with the hiss of steel. Others chat idly about market prices, never breaking conversation as their lifeblood trickles away. You marvel at how calmly they endure it, as if the sight of their own blood pouring into your basin were as common as pouring ale into a mug. But pride is a fragile thing, easily cracked. It happens one afternoon in early summer, when the air is stifling and the line of patients long. You are bleeding a man in his middle years, heavy set, with a sheen of sweat that suggests he is already unwell. He complains of a pounding in his head, of dizziness. You choose the vein at the elbow, make the cut, and watch as the blood spills dark and sluggish into the basin. You wait, as you were taught, for the colour to brighten. It does not. The man shifts uneasily, groans, and then sags forward. You bind his arm quickly, shake his shoulder, call his name. His eyes roll back. His lips part, gasping, but the breath does not return. He slumps in the chair like a sack of grain, his head hanging forward, the basin still warm in your hand. You freeze, uncertain. Your master glances over, shrugs, mutters, too much humoral imbalance, and turns back to the boil he is lancing. The other waiting customers shift impatiently, craning to see what has caused the delay. You try again to rouse the man, patting his face, but there is no response. The truth sinks in slowly, pressing like a weight against your chest. He is gone, and you have killed him. Or rather, the ritual has, and you are simply the hand that carried it out. You wait for outrage, for mourning, for some acknowledgement that a life has ended. None comes. The next man clears his throat, asks if you're finished, and points at the chair. Your master gives you a look, the same weary look he gave when you first trembled with a razor in your hand, and jerks his head toward the back door. Dutifully, you lift the limp body from the chair. He is heavy, unwieldy, his arm dangling, his head rolling against your shoulder. You drag him through the narrow corridor, feet scraping against the boards, leaving a faint trail of red drops on the floor. The alley greets you with its usual stench of rot and refuse. You lower the body onto the cobbles, straighten, and wipe your brow with the back of your arm. There is no prayer, no marker, no ceremony. Only the creak of the door as you push it closed behind you. When you return to the shop, basin in hand, another man is already seated in the chair. He smiles faintly, asking only for a shave before supper. You nod, set the basin aside, and reach for the lather. The death you just witnessed has already been absorbed into the rhythm of the trade, smoothed over by the endless scrape of steel against skin. One man dies, another needs his beard trimmed, and the shop does not distinguish between the two. The dead are as disposable as the bloody rags tossed into the bucket. You wipe your hands, straighten your back, and try to focus on the razor as if nothing has happened. It is only later, when the shop closes and the shutters are bolted against the night, that your master decides it is time to show you something more permanent than razors and basins. He takes you into the small back room, where the smell changes from soap and iron to something darker, sharper. The table there is littered with instruments, not the familiar scissors and bowls of the barber, but heavier tools that seem designed for cruelty rather than care. Your master begins to name them one by one, his voice flat, almost bored, as though he were reciting the contents of a kitchen shelf. There is the amputation saw, broad-toothed, its handle polished smooth by years of use. There are long knives, each with a different shape, curved, hooked, or straight as a dagger. There are clamps and tongs whose purpose you cannot yet imagine, and irons blackened at their tips, meant to be heated in the coals until they glow red. Each piece clinks against the other with a note that sets your teeth on edge, the cold music of metal arranged for suffering. The infamous bowl is there too, not the shallow barber's basin you have carried so often, but a deeper vessel, beaten from copper and dented from years of use. Its lip is wide, its sides darkly stained despite endless rinsing. Your master calls it the trustiest tool of all, for into it flows everything that surgery produces: blood, pus, fragments of bone, slivers of flesh. He sets it on the table with reverence, and you realise that in this shop the bowl is as sacred as any chalice on an altar. You cannot look at it without imagining it filled to the brim, steaming and clotted, and you suppress a shudder. The smell in the room is worse than anything in the front of the shop. It is the smell of scorched fat and burned cloth, the remnants of cautery. Your master demonstrates, setting one of the irons into the coals of the brazier until it glows faintly orange. The light glimmers across his face as he lifts it out, presses it against a scrap of meat from the butcher, and holds it there. The hiss is immediate, the smoke acrid, the smell nauseating, the flesh shrivels, blackens, and sticks. This, he says simply, stops the bleeding. You feel bile rise in your throat as the smoke curls toward your face. Later, when you leave the room, you realise the odour has seeped into your skin, clinging no matter how hard you scrub. At first, you're only allowed to watch. Your master demonstrates the tools on animals brought from the market. Pig carcasses mostly, their flesh close enough to a man's to serve as practice. He saws through a leg with deliberate slowness, showing you the steady rhythm required to keep the teeth from jamming. He slices open the belly, pointing out the layers of fat and muscle, the way the knife must angle to avoid dulling on bone. He presses the cautery iron against the raw edges, letting you see the way the smoke coils and the meat hardens. You try to tell yourself, these are only animals, already dead, but the human likeness of the flesh is too close to ignore. When you close your eyes at night, you see not pigs on the table, but men, their skin pale and twitching, their mouths wide in silent screams. Soon watching is not enough. Your master hands you the saw and orders you to practice. You grip the handle with sweaty palms, set the teeth against the leg of a pig, and begin to move. The vibration runs up your arm, harsh and jarring, the sound like a carpenter at work. The first strokes are clumsy, but the saw bites deeper with each pass, spraying splinters of bone dust and flecks of fat. When at last you break through, the leg flops limply away from the body, and you stand panting as though you yourself had run a race. Your master only grunts, tells you to do it again, and you realise with dread that this is to be your routine until you can cut as smoothly as he does. The transition from animals to men happens so subtly you almost do not notice it. One evening, a beggar is brought in by the watch, his arm mangled from some street accident. He has no coin, but the watchmen pay your master a token to do what he can. The man is laid out on the back table, his skin grey, his eyes rolling with fever. Your master hands you the knife and tells you to cut away the dead flesh. Your protest dies in your throat. You press the blade into the man's arm and he shrieks, arching against the table. The sound is worse than any animal's squeal because you understand it. The knife shakes in your hand, but you keep going, sawing through gristle, peeling back skin. When you finish, the beggar lies trembling, half conscious, his blood soaking the rags beneath him. Your master presses a hot iron to the wound, the smell of burning flesh choking you. You stagger back, nearly retching, while he cauterizes calmly, nodding for you to watch closely. From then on, men replace pigs more often, not paying clients at first, only the desperate, the poor, the ones brought in by soldiers or guards with injuries too ghastly to leave untreated, but not valuable enough to merit a physician. You stitch ragged cuts, scrape foul wounds, and pour boiling wine over stumps in the hope of cleansing them. The patients cry, beg, curse, or fall silent, but you learn quickly that their voices must be ignored. Your master measures your skill not by their comfort, but by your speed, by your ability to keep the blade steady while others flail beneath it. The shop begins to smell less of soap and lather, more of scorched meat and old blood. It seeps into your clothes, your hair, your very skin. You no longer bother trying to wash it out. Each tool becomes familiar, almost intimate. The knives feel like extensions of your own fingers. The clamps snap shut with a cruel precision you find yourself admiring despite your horror. The saw vibrates through your bones until you feel as if you can still hear its rasping in your sleep. The cautery iron glows in your mind's eye whenever you close your lids, a brand pressed against the inside of your skull. Even the bowl becomes a companion, always waiting, always filling, always in need of emptying. You begin to understand why your master's expression never changes. The instruments are eternal, the hands that wield them interchangeable, the men who scream beneath them forgotten before their blood has dried. There comes a night when your master decides you're ready for more. A man is brought in with his leg shattered from a fall, the bone jutting through the skin. He is barely conscious, groaning weakly. Your master looks at you, places the saw in your hands and says, "Do it." There is no ceremony, no instruction, only the weight of the tool and the expectation in his eyes. You position the saw against the man's thigh, just above the break, and press down. The teeth catch, then bite, then rasp. The man moans, thrashes faintly, but your master pins his shoulders with practiced ease. You keep sawing, each stroke pulling you deeper into the horror, until at last the bone yields, snapping apart with a final grind. The leg falls away, and for a moment you cannot breathe. Blood gushes, hot and thick, splashing against the basin. Your master holds steady. He cauterizes swiftly, the hiss filling the room. You stand trembling, the saw slick in your hands, and your master nods once, grimly, as if to say you are now truly one of his trade. You think this is the pinnacle of your training, the darkest test you will ever face. But the world has darker tests prepared, and it does not ask whether you're ready for them. It simply drags you toward them, blade in hand. Word spreads quickly that war is on the horizon. The banners are raised, the bells toll, and the city fills with men speaking of duty, glory, or simply the coin they will earn. Soldiers march through the streets with their heads held high, though their boots are cracked and their bellies half empty. Where soldiers march, wounds follow, and where wounds follow, barber-surgeons are never far behind. Your master tells you with no ceremony that you will go. Every army needs its butchers, he mutters, packing your tools into a chest. There is no question of refusal. Your hands are steady enough now, your saw strokes true enough, that the army will find use for you. So you leave the familiar stench of soap and lather behind for the open air of the field. The battlefield is no orderly chamber with chairs and basins. It is a mire of mud and screams, a churned expanse of earth where men fall faster than you can count. Tents sag in the rain, flies gather in black clouds, and the air reeks of shit, blood and smoke. You are placed not on the line itself, but just behind it, where the broken are dragged once they have been deemed still worth saving. There is no time for prayers, no space for dignity. Men are heaped together in piles of groaning flesh, their limbs bent at impossible angles, their faces grey with shock. You kneel among them with your bowl and your knives, working as quickly as your hands will allow. The first day you see more wounds than you had in months at the shop. arrows lodged deep in bellies, sword cuts laid open across skulls, spears punched clean through thighs. Some men wail like children, others bite down on sticks until their teeth splinter. Others are already silent when you reach them. You bleed them if they are fevered, stitch them if they are split, and cut when there is no other choice. The saw becomes your constant companion, rasping through bone, while the air fills with the stench of hot blood and sweat. You cannot remember afterward how many limbs you removed, only that the pile of discarded flesh grew steadily at your feet. There is no illusion of healing here. In the shop, at least, you could pretend that a shave, a stitch, or a bleeding restored balance. On the field, you know from the moment you set eyes on a man whether he will live or die. The young ones with clean wounds may limp away. The older ones with shattered torsos are corpses waiting to stiffen. Your work is to delay death where you can, to hurry it along where you must, and to keep the soldiers on their feet long enough to return to the line. The army does not care whether they limp or groan or curse. It cares only that bodies keep moving forward, carrying steel in their hands. You begin to understand that you're not a healer, but an accessory to slaughter, maintaining the machine of war with your saw as surely as any blacksmith maintains a sword. The rhythm of battle sets the rhythm of your work. When the trumpets sound and men surge forward, you wait in tense silence. When the clash begins, the wounded come staggering back in waves, and you're instantly overwhelmed. They collapse into your arms, onto your table, onto the mud itself. You work where they fall, kneeling in muck as you slice away cloth and skin, bind, cut, burn. Your hands move automatically, muscle memory guiding you even when your mind lags behind. You no longer hear individual voices, only the roar of pain as a single, endless note that fills your skull until it drowns out thought. At night, when the battlefield quiets, you do not rest. Men still trickle in, groaning, begging, clutching at wounds that have begun to rot. The torches flicker, shadows dance across the canvas of the tent, and you keep working. Sometimes you look down at your hands in the dim light and wonder if they are still yours. They are red to the wrists, sticky, trembling, yet they keep moving. They seem to belong to the war now, extensions of its endless appetite. You cannot remember when you last held a razor for a shave or scissors for a trim. Those days feel like relics from another life, a gentler one, though it was not gentle even then. The smell changes too. In the shop, you'd grown used to the mingling of soap, sweat and iron. On the field, it is worse. Here the air is thick with rot, the sweet stench of flesh that has gone bad under the sun. Flies buzz ceaselessly, crawling over wounds even as you cut them open. When the wind shifts, you catch the acrid tang of burning bodies piled on pyres, mixed with the reek of horses left to bloat where they fell. You breathe it all in until it becomes part of you, coating your tongue, settling in your lungs, so that even when you try to imagine clean air, you cannot. You tell yourself you're doing good, that each limb you cut away spares a man from fever, that each cauterized wound grants him a chance at survival. But the truth gnaws at you. You see the men who do not survive, carried to the edge of camp and heaped in pits with lime shovelled over them. You see the hollow-eyed ones who limp back into battle, pale and shaking, only to fall again within the hour. You hear the soldiers mutter that the Barber-Surgeons kill as many as they save. Some spit at you as they pass, others clutch your hands in desperate gratitude, and you begin to realise there is no real difference between the two. The war does not pause, and neither can you. One morning, after a particularly vicious clash, the wounded arrive faster than you can manage. They pour into the tent, collapsing onto tables, into corners, onto the very floor. You are handed a soldier whose leg is a ruin of splintered bone and torn muscle, the arrow that caused it still lodged deep. There is no time for deliberation, no time for comfort. A saw is shoved into your hands, and you prepare to cut. Around you, the air is filled with the clash of steel, the shriek of men, and the whistle of arrows flying overhead. You steady the leg, set the teeth of the saw against the flesh just above the break, and begin. The soldier howls, thrashing so wildly that another man is forced to pin him down. You saw with a rhythm you have learned too well, pushing aside the screams, the spray of blood, the sound of arrows striking the canvas outside. The bone yields at last, and the leg comes free, falling into the muck at your feet. You lift your head, chest heaving, and realise the truth of it all. You are not a healer, not a saviour. You are simply another instrument of war, a blade that moves when commanded, a tool as necessary and as forgettable as the swords in the soldier's hands. The leg you cut away does not vanish from memory. It lies there in the mud beside your feet, pale as cheese and streaked with blood, until someone finally tosses it onto the growing heap outside the tent. You try not to look at that heap, but it looms in your vision no matter which way you turn. Arms, legs, feet, sometimes even hands, with rings still on the fingers, all jumbled together like firewood waiting to be stacked. Flies buzz in a black cloud above them, their drone blending into the wails of men within the tent until the sound becomes one ceaseless chorus of decay. You know this is your world now, not the barber's chair, not the guild hall, but this stinking midden of human parts, ever replenished, never diminished. Every day brings more bodies and more limbs to the pile. You rise at dawn to the sound of groaning men dragged from the field, and you work until nightfall under torchlight, the shadows of your saw strokes playing across the canvas walls. Amputations are as regular as breathing. You no longer flinch at the first scream. Instead, you mark the rhythm of the cut, the saw's rasping bite through flesh and bone. One man's cries blend into another's until you cease to hear them as individual voices. It becomes a background hum, like wind in trees or rain on rooftops. The only sound that pierces your numbness is when a man falls silent too suddenly, his breath cut short by shock or blood loss. Then you glance at his still face, shrug, and move to the next. The work is endless because the war is endless. Men fight, men fall, men are carried in, and you cut until your arms ache, your wrists throb, and the skin between your fingers cracks from drying blood. You try to wash, but there is never enough water, and what little you find is soon pink with gore. Your clothes stiffen, your hair clumps, and your boots squelch with each step. You can smell yourself, even over the battlefield stench, a walking effigy of iron and rot. The men you treat reek of fear and filth too, but the difference is they get to leave, or be dragged away. You remain. Sometimes when the pile grows too large, soldiers are ordered to carry the limbs away, dumping them into pits hastily dug at the edge of camp. The soil there is thick with discarded parts, and when it rains you can see fingers poking out of the mud, pale and swollen, as if the earth itself has sprouted them. You learn to step over these without thought, your eyes fixed on the tent ahead. There is no dignity in disposal. There is only the steady cycle of severing, stacking, and burying. You begin to wonder how the soldiers still look at you, as though you're a healer. You know better. You're not saving them. You're pruning them, trimming away ruined pieces, so they might hobble back to fight another day. They clutch your arm in gratitude, thank you through cracked lips, sometimes even kiss your filthy hand. You nod, say nothing, and watch them limp away pale and broken. The truth is that the army would rather have half a man than no man at all, and your saw is the tool that makes such men possible. You are not a physician, you are a craftsman of cripples. In rare moments of pause, when no one is being dragged in, you turn back to your barber's tools. Soldiers still want their beards trimmed, their hair cropped, their moustaches shaped. You find yourself shaving men between amputations, the contrast so absurd It almost makes you laugh. One moment you're sawing through a femur, the next you're carefully scraping a jawline smooth. The lather smells faintly of lavender, masking for a heartbeat the reek of pus and charred flesh. For a few minutes, both of you pretend the world is civilized again, as if neat whiskers could undo the ruin of war. Then the horns sound, more wounded stagger in, and you're back to the saw. You come to savour those shaves, not for the act itself, but for the illusion they provide. The men you shave often chatter nervously, speaking of their homes, their wives, the meals they miss. Their words float like ghosts of normal life, faint reminders that the world is larger than this butcher's tent. For a few breaths, you can almost believe you're back in the shop, listening to gossip while your hands glide with practiced ease. But the illusion never lasts. Blood dries under your nails, and the screams soon return to remind you of what you are. Night offers no respite. If anything, it worsens. The wounded trickle in even after the fighting ends, carried by comrades or crawling themselves through the mud. Torches throw long shadows across the canvas walls, making the heap of limbs seem to twitch as if alive. You hear screams even when no one is on the table, echoes trapped in your ears that refuse to leave. When you finally lie down on your pallet, your muscles aching, you still feel the vibration of the saw in your arms. You close your eyes and the sound begins again in your head. The rasping, the grinding, the sudden give when bone splits. You dream of it, wake gasping, and realise it was not a dream at all, but memory replaying itself. The other surgeons and apprentices around you fare no better. Some drink themselves to a stupor each night, clutching their mugs like talismans against the horror. Others grow eerily cheerful, laughing too loudly, joking about the size of the pile, wagering on how many limbs tomorrow will bring. You do not laugh, nor do you drink enough to forget. You simply keep working, because work is the only thing that prevents thought. There are moments when the line between barber and surgeon blurs so completely, you forget which tools belong to which task. A razor, sharpened for shaving, slices a vein to prepare for amputation. Scissors meant for hair trim ragged cloth from around a wound. The same basin that caught lather in the morning catches blood by evening. You realise the distinction was always an illusion, that in this life, grooming and butchery are one and the same. The soldiers do not care. To them, a clean shave and a missing leg are both simply services rendered, paid for in coin or loyalty. As days stretch into weeks, you begin to lose track of time. The pile outside grows and shrinks, like some grotesque tide. The screams blur into one endless wail. Your hands blister and scar, your fingernails turn black, and still the work does not stop. You no longer wonder how many you have treated, how many have died, how many have returned to the line. Numbers mean nothing here. Only the next man in the chair matters, and the next, and the next. One night, after a particularly brutal clash, the tent is filled beyond capacity. Bodies are laid across tables, across benches, across the very ground. You cut, bind, and burn until your arms feel as though they no longer belong to you. At some point you stumble outside to dump a basin and find the pile higher than you have ever seen it, a mountain of limbs buzzing with flies. The torchlight casts strange shadows across it, making it seem as though the hands are reaching upward, grasping at the night sky. The smell is unbearable, thick and sweet, a stench that coats your throat. You lean against the heap, too exhausted to move, and slide down until you're sitting among the severed parts. The heat of the day still clings to the flesh, and the flies crawl lazily across your arms as you close your eyes. You tell yourself you will rise in a moment, that you will return to the tent, but the weariness pulls you down like stone. The rasp of the saw begins again in your ears, steady and inescapable, as if someone is still cutting nearby. You know there is no one. It is only your own mind replaying the endless sound. You curl against the mound, drifting into sleep. Your dreams filled with bone dust and the ceaseless drone of sawing, until you can no longer tell whether you're sleeping, waking, or simply trapped forever in the noise. War does not end so much as it drifts elsewhere, leaving the soil packed with bones and the air forever altered. The banners march off, the wounded who can still hobble follow, and you are told you may go. There are no trumpets to mark your departure, no praise for the limbs you cut away. You leave with your chest of instruments, your saw wrapped in cloth, and a body that smells of iron and smoke, no matter how many rivers you cross. The path back to the city feels longer than the road that carried you to the battlefield, but perhaps that is because you're heavier now, carrying the weight of every scream that lodged itself in your ears and never left. When the gates of the city rise before you again, you are struck by how unchanged they look. The stalls still bustle with fish and bread. Children still run through the alleys shrieking in play, and church bells still peal at the appointed hour. The world has carried on as though nothing has happened, as though the ground is not still shaking under your feet. You stand before the shop, the barber's pole turning slowly in the breeze. Its stripes are bright, almost gaudy. Once it meant little more than a signboard, but now you see it for what it is, a symbol of blood and bandages, of endless cuts and endless stains. The man who trained you is gone. Perhaps the war claimed him after all, perhaps a fever, perhaps only the indifference of time. No one inquires and you do not ask. The shop is yours now, or rather, you have simply stepped into the space he left. One barber-surgeon vanishes, another takes the chair. That is how the trade continues. Stepping inside, you feel the familiarity close around you like a cloak. The razors gleam in their places, the basins line the shelves, the leeches swim lazily in their jars. But everything smells different. Soap and lather are still here, but the iron tang of blood seeps from your very skin, refusing to be scrubbed away. You unpack your chest, place the saw, knives, and cautery irons in their rightful spots, and realise the shop is no longer simply a barber's room. It is a battlefield tent disguised as one. The civilians who will sit in your chair do not know this, but you do. The first client you shave on your return is a merchant who cannot stop talking about tariffs. He wants to look respectable for a guild audience, so you lather his chin, tilt his head, and set the razor to his skin. He prattles on about wool and trade while you glide the blade down his jaw. His words are hollow, rattling in your ears against the memory of soldiers muttering final prayers as you steadied their chins in the mud. You scrape, wipe, and send him on his way, his beard neat, his coin on the counter. It should feel ordinary. Instead, it feels like you're acting in a play whose lines you no longer believe. Soon the sick return as well. A baker arrives with a burn that has blistered and split. You unwrap his arm, clean the wound, and for a moment you swear you can smell the scorched flesh of cautery irons, even though no flame burns nearby. Another day, a mother brings her son with a boil on his neck. You lance it, pus spilling as if the battlefield never ended, and her thanks sound no different from a soldier's desperate gratitude. The shop pretends to be gentler than the tent, but the body itself does not change. Flesh is flesh, whether clothed in wool or in armour, and it fails in the same ways. What surprises you most is not the sameness of the screams, but how weak they sound now. A farmer howls when you wrench a molar from his jaw, and you almost laugh at how fragile he is. You have seen men bite through straps while their legs were sawed off at the thigh, and this man cries over a tooth. But you do not laugh, because laughter would serve no purpose. You nod, you hold up the tooth as proof of your work, and you wipe his spit from your sleeve. The comparison lodges in your chest, though, and you begin to see every civilian patient as a pale reflection of the soldiers who filled your basin with their blood. Clients speak of harvests and weather, of parish disputes and rising rents, and you find their words irritating in their smallness. They chatter while you scrape razors across their throats, while you open their veins, while you stitch their cuts. You nod, grunt, and murmur agreement because you must, but you are not really listening. In your mind, you are back in the mud, where the only sounds that mattered were the clash of steel and the steady rasp of your saw. Their gossip is noise, and you endure it because silence unnerves them more than the sight of their own blood. The apprentices who sweep your floor now look at you as you once looked at your own master. Their hands tremble when they hold razors. Their eyes widen at the sight of pus and clotted blood. You watch them with a detachment that unsettles you. You could warn them, tell them what waits beyond these walls, but you know it would change nothing. The trade consumes each boy in turn, burning out curiosity, numbing nerves, until he too learns to scrape and cut without flinching. You give them orders, correct their grip, and send them back to their work, because that is what a master does. You are the master now, and the indifference of the trade runs through you. The guild is unchanged, of course. You sit through its quarrels, now as a full member rather than an apprentice, and find them more absurd than ever. Men bellow over parishes, fees and boundaries while you sit silently, remembering piles of limbs. They fine you when you cross an invisible line, and you pay without protest. There is no point fighting. The guild squabbles are as endless as the war, though far less honest. At least on the field you knew the cost of failure. Here the only thing that dies is your patience. What changes most in you is not your work, nor your clients, but your reaction to death itself. Once it shook you. Once you woke at night with the screams of the dead in your ears. Now you feel nothing. One evening a man faints in your chair during a bleeding, his head lolling as his life drains into the basin. His lips twitch, then sag, and you know he is gone. You do not cry out, do not gasp. You simply bind his arm out of habit, press your fingers to his throat to confirm what you already know, and then call for your apprentices to drag him to the alley. Another man is already waiting, asking for a shave. You pick up the razor and continue. And that is when you realize the war has carved you down to the bone. You do not flinch at death anymore. You do not pause or pray or curse. Death sits in your chair as often as life, and you welcome it with the same blank expression. The boy who once trembled at the sight of a blade is gone. What remains is a barber-surgeon who looks death in the face and does not blink. The years do not pass as they once did. There are no milestones, no markers, no sense of progress. Time simply drips away like blood from a vein, soaking the floor until you no longer notice the stain. You rise, open the shutters, light the brazier, and the same motions begin again. Men come in with their beards shaggy, their gums rotten, their humours supposedly imbalanced. They sit in the chair, they groan, they pay, and they leave. The seasons shift outside, harvests rise and fall, plagues come and go, but within these walls the work is changeless. You shave, you cut, you bind, you bleed. You might be 25 or 45 or older. It hardly matters anymore. Each year is simply another turn of the wheel. The horror once sharp, once fresh, becomes something softer, though not kinder. It settles into you like a second skin, heavy but familiar. Hair, blood, pus, teeth. They are no longer separate things. They fall together into the same basin, sweep together into the same pile, dry together on the same apron. The mingling no longer startles you. A razor moves from a chin to a vein without pause. A pair of forceps lifts a molar and then plucks at torn flesh. You do not think of them as distinct acts anymore, but as variations on the same gesture. The handling of human matter, the rearranging of bodies to suit the moment. Horror only exists when something feels unusual. Here nothing is unusual. Drink becomes part of the rhythm as well. At first you took it in the evenings, to soften the edges of the day. Then you began to take it in the mornings too, a nip of spirit to steady your hand before the first shave. Now it is threaded through your hours, as firmly as your tools are. A swallow between clients, a mug before lancing, a draught after a bleed. It no longer dulls the memories. Those have already dulled themselves. Instead, it keeps your hands loose, your voice steady enough to reassure men who cannot see how empty your eyes are. You tell yourself you drink because of the trade. The truth is you drink because there is nothing else to do. The talk of clients fills the shop endlessly, though you barely hear it anymore. They chatter about rain, about the guild, about neighbours and wives. They speak through bleeding mouths and stitched cheeks, through foam and lather. You nod, grunt, and occasionally mutter agreement, enough to keep them calm. It is astonishing how men will speak of the weather while their blood runs into your basin, as though they can pretend normalcy if they keep their mouths moving. Once their words might have irritated you. Now they wash over you like the drone of flies, noticed only when they stop. If a man falls silent mid-sentence, you glance up quickly to see if his lips are pale, if his breath has fled. Otherwise, you no longer care. The smell of the shop no longer strikes you either. What once made you gag now simply coats your lungs. Soap, sweat, lather, pus, rot, blood. It is the air you breathe. You only remember how foul it is when strangers recoil, holding cloths to their faces, muttering curses as they pass your doorway. To you, the scent is ordinary, even comforting. You know you are home when you breathe it in. You wonder sometimes whether you smell the same in the street. The looks from passers-by suggest you do, but you cannot change it. The stink has soaked into your clothes, your hair, your very skin. It will follow you to the grave. The apprentices beneath you look at you with the same mixture of awe and fear you once reserved for your own master. Their hands tremble when they first hold a razor. Their stomachs turn when they first lance a boil. You watch them falter, gag and pale, and you offer only curt correction. There is no point in gentleness. The trade will harden them, or it will spit them out. Some leave, running to other work rather than endure another day of screams. Others stay, and you watch the light in their eyes dim, replaced by the same weariness that fills yours. They ask you questions at first, about technique, about humours, about why a certain cut is better than another. You answer, but without conviction. In time, they stop asking. Silence settles in, the only true inheritance you can give them. You sometimes wonder whether this numbness is what your old master felt, the indifference that so unsettled you as a boy. You used to think it cruelty, a flaw in his character. Now you see it differently. It was not cruelty, it was inevitability. The trade erodes feeling the way water erodes stone. You cannot hold on to horror forever. The screams would drown you if you did. Better to let them become meaningless, like the ringing of a bell you no longer hear. And so you cut and you bind and you listen to the chatter of clients with the same blank face your master once wore. You have become him, whether you wished it or not. Age announces itself not with ceremony, but with betrayal. It comes quietly, slipping into your joints and your eyes, then into the steadiness of your hands. At first you think it is fatigue, the kind that a night's rest or a stronger draught of spirit can put to rights. But soon you notice that the tremor lingers, even in the morning, even before the drink has touched your lips. Your fingers twitch when you hold a razor. Your grip feels less certain around the handle of the saw. You tell yourself it is nothing, that every man shakes a little when the weather turns cold. Yet deep down, you know this is not the cold. It is time itself settling into your bones. The years have taken their toll on your eyes as well. Once you could see every detail of a beard's edge, every glint of steel against hair. Now the outlines blur. The light in the shop seems dimmer. The candles sputter when you try to focus. You lean closer. squinting, pretending you are examining carefully when in truth you're simply trying to see. The apprentices notice. You catch them exchanging glances as you bend too close to a client's face, or as you tilt your head awkwardly while threading a needle. They do not say anything aloud, but the silence says enough. The accidents begin small. A nick too deep on a man's chin, a slip of the blade that leaves more than stubble behind. Clients curse, press cloths to their wounds, mutter about your clumsiness. You apologize, make excuses about dull razors or fidgeting customers. Some accept it, others do not. More troubling are the times when you lose your place entirely, forgetting whether you have already tied off a vein, forgetting where the pus should drain. The apprentices step forward hesitantly, their hands hovering near yours as though ready to steady you. You want to snap at them, but you do not. You know why they hover. You have hovered the same way yourself once, watching your old master falter. Now the roles have turned. Drink, which once steadied you, now worsens the tremor. Your hands wobble when you pour, when you sharpen, when you lift the saw, yet you cannot stop. The habit is as ingrained as the trade itself. Without it, the hours stretch unbearably long. With it, the hours blur, but your grip is looser. Your vision swimmy. The apprentices whisper about that too, though you pretend not to hear. You remind yourself that many barber-surgeons drink, that ale is safer than water, that spirits numb the edge of gore. But you also know that when you lean too heavily on the counter to keep your balance, your apprentices exchange knowing looks. The guild notices as well. They never cared much for you when you were young, and they care even less now. You sit on the benches as they argue about parishes, but when disputes arise over your work, you find less support than you once did. Where once fines were paid and forgiven, now accusations linger. A client complains that you shook while shaving him, another that you bled him too long. The wardens glance at you with faintly amused expressions, as though they are waiting for you to admit defeat. They no longer see you as a craftsman, but as a liability, a relic who lingers too long at the chair. They would rather see your apprentices take your place, fresh hands to fill the guild's coffers for decades to come. Clients, too, grow cautious. Some ask for another to shave them, citing your eyes, your tremors, or simply their own superstition. Others sit stiffly in the chair, watching you with distrust, flinching at every scrape of the blade. Their unease makes your hand shake more, which in turn makes them flinch more. It becomes a vicious circle, an erosion of confidence on both sides. You begin to dread the act of shaving more than any surgery, because there is less room for error. A man expects to bleed when his leg is cut off. He does not expect to bleed when his whiskers are trimmed. The apprentices eye your chair with a hunger that is poorly concealed. You see them watching when you fumble. See the calculation in their faces. How much longer will he hold it? How soon until the seat is mine? You cannot even resent them for it. You did the same once. You watched your master falter. You waited for his hands to slow. You wondered how long until the shop was yours. You did not wish him ill, but you knew that the trade cannot wait on frailty. Now you are the frailty, and they are the future. The inevitability of it gnaws at you more than the tremor itself. Routine continues, though more brittle now. You still rise, still open the shutters, still light the brazier. You still shave, bind, bleed and cut. But each task feels more precarious, as though the instruments themselves are testing you. Razors that once glided now catch on skin. Needles slip through your fingers, forcing you to re-thread them. The saw, once steady in your grip, now jerks slightly with each stroke, making your apprentices wince as they hold the patient steady. You know the day is coming when one of those jerks will cost more than a nick, when a life will be lost, not to disease or bad luck, but to your faltering hands. The whispers grow. You hear them in the tavern, at the market, even within your own shop. Men say you are not what you were, that your hands betray you, that your eyes no longer see true. Some still come out of habit or loyalty, but others drift to neighbouring shops, to younger men with steadier fingers. The guild does nothing to protect you. Why would they? They can extract more from a younger surgeon's dues than from your dwindling clientele. You realise, bitterly, that in the end, your worth was never in your skill, but in your coin. One afternoon, the inevitable happens. A man comes in complaining of a festering cut on his arm. It is a minor thing, a procedure you have performed countless times. You unwrap the cloth, clean the wound, and take up the knife to scrape away the rotten flesh. Your hand trembles, the knife slips, and you cut too deep. The man yelps, jerks back, blood spilling more than it should. You press a cloth, stammer reassurance, but his eyes are wide with fear and anger. The apprentices rush forward to help, binding the wound while you step back. Your breath ragged. In the corner of the shop, another client mutters to himself. You hear the words clearly. He is no longer fit for the trade. The words sting sharper than any blade. They are not shouted, not spat, not meant for your ears, but they reach you all the same. You stand frozen as your apprentices finish the binding, their movements quicker, steadier than yours. The man glares at you, mutters a curse, and leaves with his arm wrapped, his trust in you severed. The room falls silent except for the faint hiss of the brazier. You hear the whisper again, echoing in your mind, circling like a fly over a wound. No longer fit, you lower the knife, your hand still trembling, and realise they are right. When the end finally arrives, it happens without warning. One morning you rise to light the brazier, and the razor slips from your fingers. It clatters against the boards, the steel ringing louder than it should in the quiet shop. When you bend to retrieve it, your knees buckle, and you collapse to the floor with a grunt that startles even you. The apprentices rush to your side, muttering about fever, lifting you clumsily beneath the arms. You try to protest, to insist you can still work, but your tongue feels heavy and your chest burns with every breath. The truth is plain to them, and to you alike. Your body has finally betrayed you. No amount of drink, no discipline, no stubbornness will steady it again. They set you on the pallet in the back room, the same place where you once carried patients half dead from their wounds. Now it is you who sweats through the straw, shivering despite the brazier's glow. You listen to the sound of the shop from behind the thin wall, the scrape of razors, the murmur of gossip, the groans of men with boils or rotting teeth. The routine continues without you, as you always knew it would. The apprentices take your place without hesitation. Their hands are young, their eyes sharp, their voices steady, as they assure clients that nothing has changed. They are right. The shop does not need you. It never did. Days blur into one another as fever grips you. You drift in and out of consciousness, visions crowding your head. You see the battlefield again, the piles of limbs buzzing with flies. You hear the guild wardens arguing about parishes while men bleed to death outside. You smell the cautery iron pressed into raw flesh. The memories swirl together, indistinguishable from the present, until you cannot tell whether you are in the back room of the shop or the mud of a war camp. The screams echo the same. The smell is the same. Only the faces have changed. Occasionally, one of the apprentices looks in on you. They bring water, sometimes bread, though you can scarcely hold it down. Their eyes are careful, polite, but not sorrowful. You recognise that look. It is the look you once gave your own master when he began to falter. Respect tinged with impatience, a silent calculation of how long before the chair becomes theirs. You cannot blame them. The trade does not allow for sentiment. It demands steady hands, and yours are finished. The clients hardly notice your absence. Some ask after you once, then shrug when told you're ill. Others do not ask at all, simply submitting their chins and arms to whichever apprentice steps forward. They pay the same, complain the same, chatter the same. A barber-surgeon is a tool, and tools are replaceable. If one breaks, another must be found. Their lives do not pause for yours. Beards continue to grow. Veins continue to throb. Wounds continue to fester. There is no gap in demand, and so there can be no gap in supply. One night, the fever grows so strong that you cannot move at all. You lie staring at the ceiling, your breath rattling, your skin slick with sweat. Each inhale feels shallower than the last, your chest tightening as though someone has set a stone upon it. Outside the door, you hear laughter, the apprentices joking with clients, the sound of coin clinking on the counter. For a moment, you feel anger that they can laugh while you lie dying, but the anger fades quickly. You realise you laughed once too while your own master faded. It is not malice, it is simply the way of things. The torchlight on the wall wavers, then blurs. Your mouth tries to form words, perhaps a curse, perhaps a prayer, but nothing emerges but a faint rattle. The air will not come. Your vision narrows until the ceiling shrinks to a dark tunnel, until even the sound of laughter outside grows muffled and far away. At last, the stone upon your chest grows too heavy. You exhale once, shallow and final, and there is no breath to draw back in. Your body sinks into stillness. Eventually, they come for you. The apprentices lift you from the pallet. Your body light as straw now that the fever has burned away your strength. Your head lolls, your mouth hangs open, but no one closes it. They carry your body to the pit outside the walls, where paupers, plague victims, and nameless bodies are thrown together. You are set down among them with no marker, no words. The apprentices tip you into the earth, as though discarding scraps from the basin. You are one body among many, no different from the rest. They return to the shop immediately. There are still clients waiting, still work to be done. The basin must be rinsed, the razors sharpened, the floor swept. The apprentices take up your tools as if they had always belonged to them. The chair does not sit empty for long. Another man lowers himself into it. Another coin clinks onto the counter. The sound of scraping steel resumes, unbroken, indifferent to the fact that you're gone. And in some other corner of the city, or perhaps even in the same shop, another boy sits on a stool, broom in hand, eyes wide with fear. He is young, trembling, eager to prove himself. He sharpens a razor for the first time, his master's weary gaze on his back. He does not know yet what waits for him. The battlefield, the limbs, the endless screams. He does not know that one day he too will collapse in the back room, feverish and discarded, replaced without pause. He only knows that he has been chosen, and that the chair before him is the path to his future. That is the trade's true continuity, not legacy, not remembrance, but replacement. One man falls, another rises. The shop survives, the wheel turns, and the sound of steel scraping against flesh never ceases. You are gone, erased as neatly as lather from a chin, while another trembling youth takes the apprentice's chair where you once began. And that brings us to the end of tonight's quiet descent into the life of a medieval barber-surgeon, a world where the scent of soap was forever drowned out by the stink of blood and burned flesh, and where one trembling apprentice was always waiting to replace the last. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.